Welcome into a Monday edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com. John Alden with you as always. Hope you enjoyed your weekend. And this is the first of the newly weekly editions, I should say, of In Touch with Indiana Sports. So you happen to miss Friday's episode, I made an announcement of sorts. These shows will now be just once a week instead of being Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, just because a lot of changes are coming for me, especially when it comes to my other job. I've just been given more responsibility and also got a baby on the way. So some adjustments needed to be made. I won't go into much more detail on that right now. If you do want to hear the details on it, just check out the beginning of Friday's episode. And again, thanks to all of the very nice things that were said on the YouTube comments from Friday's episode about reaching 100 episodes. It was very nice, all the things that were sent to me about that, and it's been very fun. I'm glad to be able to continue this journey just in a bit of a different manner over the next, several weeks, months, whatever it may be. This once a week show thing, it may not be permanent, but it will probably be the norm for a while. I don't know how long that while will be, but we're going to roll with it. And again, it is kind of fitting now that we're going into off-season mode. We kind of have been from an Indiana perspective for a while. We've been in off-season mode, but in the grand scheme of things, now that basketball is just a week away, from the Final Four taking place and then officially concluding after that, both of the major sports calendars will be, effectively over and into the off season. So it is that time of year, and it is also that time of night. I am recording this on a Sunday evening, and again, this may be the norm as well. Who knows? But we've also got some severe weather on the way, and so my wife and I are planning over. Now I'm stumbling over my own words. My wife and I are planning on heading over to someone's house who has a basement on my side of the family. So we'll be doing that here after I finish recording. Hopefully we won't get anything super bad, but hey, you never know. Got to take precautions. But this also means the return of an early release episode. I know some of you guys like that. So look forward to getting into the rest of today's stuff with you. We'll also go over, I think I have one YouTube comment I'm going to save. We'll save that for the end. And then also we have Staley on today's show. And we'll go over some of the Indiana basketball transfer portal stuff. Talk about how there's kind of not been a whole lot of movement. There's been some names to really keep an eye on that he'll go into more detail with. And then we also get into a few other things as well. So hopefully you guys are ready for another good week, and I'm ready for it as well. And I guess without further ado, we'll get started here with what I've got planned for you. Again, I guess we'll start with the transfer portal. And I said this on Friday. I don't think it's anything to be too concerned about right now when it comes to the fact that not only does Indiana not have any scholarship players remaining other than Luke Goody, who is seeking an extra year of eligibility. And I tend to think that will get granted to him, but I'm not somebody who works for the NCAA, and the NCAA is one of the most inconsistent, backwards entities in college sports. So, there's really no telling how that will end up for him, but I tend to think most people are optimistic about the return of Luke Goody to this roster. If he just decides to, maybe he'll change his mind after seeing, how the rest of the roster has essentially disappeared. But I also think he's somebody who, he came back to Indiana not only for the NIL, but because, he played high school basketball in Indiana. Even though he did initially commit to the Hoosiers, there is still that, kind of homegrownness, if you will, that I would say lies within him in some way. So it would not surprise me to see him not only get his extra year of eligibility, but to spend it with Indiana. So we'll wait and see how that ends up working itself out. And other than that, though, not a lot of, no commitments. We'll talk more in depth, like I said, about who some of the guys Indiana is currently eyeing and those who are expected to commit to Indiana. And there's really only a couple of names and we've gone over a few of them. One of those being Tucker DeVries and the other being Connor Enright from DePaul. Those, I believe, are the only two guys that are at this point in time considered sure things. There's a number of others who are expected to, kind of get into the mix of things. And now that we've seen the Sweet 16 and Elite Eight games play out, I'd say give it, I mean, maybe even later on today, meaning Monday at this point, you will see some of those guys from teams that just finished up their NCAA tournament run. You'll probably see several of them enter into the transfer portal if they are not out of eligibility. Now they're, when you're playing for, big programs like Kentucky and you still have eligibility left, there's a good chance that, with the bigger programs, they've got good enough NIL packages and things to look forward to that they won't necessarily, their first thing might not be to jump into the transfer portal, right? So not every, even though it does kind of feel like every player sometimes is in the transfer portal, not everybody will be available, of course. So I will be curious to see how many guys end up putting their name in and how many Tucker. I've done this a lot today. I've been referring to Darren DeVries as Tucker DeVries, and I don't know why. I know Tucker DeVries is the kid, and and Darren DeVries is the coach. So either way, I'm sure that won't be the last time that I get those two people mixed up for whatever reason. But I do kind of want to react to what happened this weekend in the NCAA tournament. And of course, we had not only the Sweet 16, but the Elite Eight. And I do want to talk about the Elite Eight game between Florida and Texas Tech. I mean, if any of you took that game in, so my wife and I, we were with some of her family this weekend. We had some out of town family in for her baby shower. And we went over to the Airbnb that they were staying at, and we were watching Florida Texas Tech. And a lot of us, not only we weren't really rooting for Florida for Florida's sake, at least I wasn't, but a lot of us who still were alive in our respective bracket challenges, had Florida advancing not only to the Final Four, but even winning the national championship in some cases. And when Texas Tech was up by, 10 points with only like 2 minutes and 50 something seconds left, I think a lot of us, I mean, really throughout the majority of the second half, we were like, okay, Florida is going to fall. They're not going to make this magical run with Todd Golden. And all of a sudden, Walter Clayton Jr., and again, I'm not somebody who really follows SEC basketball very closely. I do follow Kentucky a little bit just because I'm around it so much. But man, Walter Clayton Jr., I saw somebody say this on social media the other day. He had kind of his Kemba Walker moment, which was, I mean, he willed Florida to that win in the Elite Eight to get them to the Final Four. I mean, if for those of you who did or didn't see it, whether or not you did, or it doesn't really matter, but there was the definitive play for me is when he had the ball inside the perimeter and he's like, you know what, I'm going to dribble this thing out to the 3-point line and pull up and shoot it. And he knocked it down. And that wasn't even the first of his many shots. That was kind of like the one that really kind of, you realize Florida was getting their way with things, right? So very, very awesome finish, I'll say, in that game. And again, not a Florida fan, of course, but, just kind of crazy to see things play out the way that it did. I fell asleep during Duke and Alabama with the Elite Eight game. But I was very surprised to wake up and find out that Duke had won by 20 points, especially after seeing what Alabama did the other night, scoring 113. It does kind of make you wonder, like, is that Nate Oates' style of offense? Is it not as consistent or reliable as one might think? Now, they're making an Elite Eight, so it's good, but when you're going against the best of the best like Duke, I mean, you got blown out by 20 points. Like, I don't think anybody really expected that game to be a blowout of sorts. Now, of course, Duke has a generational talent in somebody like Cooper Flagg, and so it can be a little bit, it's kind of a different animal when you face the Blue Devils, right? And I know it's not the Mike Krzyzewski Duke Blue Devils, but I do think John Shire over the last year or two has definitely gained a little more respect than he initially did. A lot of people kind of thought he was just handed the reins to this, legendary program that is Duke men's basketball. So, if he can kind of solidify, his worthiness of having the job if he's able to get it done and win the whole thing this year. And then we get to Sunday's games. And I guess we'll start. Excuse me, I'm gonna hit that cough button really fast as I here we go. Here we go. Didn't want to do that. I remember, I tell you what, thinking about that reminds me of the early portions of this year whenever I was coughing way too much. And hopefully I don't go back to those days anytime soon because that was miserable recording during that time. But anyway, getting to Sunday's games with Houston and Tennessee. Again, Tennessee, another team that a lot of people thought was riding a lot of momentum, and Houston just kind of slammed the door on them, won by nearly 20 points. And of course, the Indiana interest here is Kelvin Sampson going to finally get it done? And Indiana fans, myself included, continue to wonder, what if what Sampson had done back when all of that the illegal texting or whatever of the recruits, all the stuff that is legal now in every way, shape, and form legal. Imagine if things were not as restrictive back in those days. Indiana would have somebody who probably would have Indiana, I want to say, have already won a national championship, because that's a lot harder to do at any level, no matter which team you're coaching. But I mean, he's had Houston as a consistent winner for a long time now. And now they're in the Big 12. Before that, they weren't even in the power conference, and they were still very competitive. And so to see Kelvin Sampson having the success that he is now seeing and has been seeing for quite some time, I think we get to this moment every year with the NCAA tournament where you think, wow, where would Indiana be had they not been forced to let Kelvin Sampson go because of what was considered cheating back in 2008 or 7, whatever it was. I think it was 2007. If that had not happened, I know Indiana rebounded well enough with Tom Crean. It just took a while, but that's, if you never had to go down that route. I mean, Kelvin Sampson at this point, how long would he have been the head coach to Indiana? I don't know the exact year that he became the head coach. But either way, he would have been with the Hoosiers for quite a long time. And who knows what his stats would have been as a head coach in Bloomington. Would he have gotten Indiana back to a Final Four by now? Would he have won that elusive national championship let's think about this for a second. Indiana is just a couple of years away from being 50 years removed from their last national. Is it 50 or 40? I think I might be getting ahead of myself. 40 years. Yeah, I am getting ahead of myself. That's still a long time, though. 40 years removed from their most recent national championship. And before that, so like the collective years of between all of Indiana's national championships is 47. They won 5 national championships within a span of 47 years. And now you've gone nearly that entire length of time without another national title. And I know people don't want to hear this, but it's slowly becoming closer to the reality. I mean, Indiana's kind of in that same boat as UCLA. Like, all of their history and tradition is squarely in the past, outside of some decently successful seasons here and there. And, if Darren DeVries doesn't work out the way that, fans hope, I would say the goal should be, you want to win a championship as fast as you can, but it'd be wonderful if Indiana was able to string something together and, before they get to that 47-year mark, finally get back into, to winning one. So you don't have to say, oh, wow, they won 5 within 47 years, and then they hadn't won anything until 47 years later, which, again, I know I'm kind of, that's a stat I didn't realize I was going to mention today, but it is something very odd to think about. So again, in 2 years, it'll be 40 years, and then you'll have 7 years after that. So about 9 total years to find a national championship before people will start throwing that stat around. So we'll see. And then the final game, you'll actually hear Kyler and I referring to this game as it was ongoing a little bit. Michigan State and Auburn, because we recorded this our segment a little earlier. But Michigan State losing to Auburn eliminates the Big Ten from contention into the Final Four. And thankfully, I'm so glad we don't get an all SEC Final Four. I'm currently in a group chat with, with some family members that are SEC, fans of SEC teams. It doesn't matter. They're Kentucky fans. But it's so weird, the whole SEC, like chanting fanfare, like wanting the SEC to be so awesome, whatever. Maybe I'm just a hater, and I guess I am. I'm sure with all of you who listen, most of you, if not all of you, are Indiana fans. I'm sure you hate to see the SEC succeed in awesome ways as well. But I just don't think there's any conference out there that, if their team's not in it, they pull so hard for the other SEC teams like that conference. I don't get that same vibe from the Big Ten as much. Like there is some of that, and I do like to see Big Ten teams do well, but there's just something cringy when you see fans of an SEC team that's not that, if they're doing the SEC chant for somebody else, that's just weird to me. Like, I'm not going to be watching Ohio State win a national championship in football and be chanting Big Ten, Big Ten. Is that not cringeworthy? I don't know. I just want to throw that out there. But yeah, so our Final Four is set, and we've got 4 1 seeds. For the first time since 2008, I would have been 11 years old. I was still living in Indiana at the time. I was in elementary school. Put that in perspective. For some of you out there, put that in perspective for me. I mean, I'm about to have a child, so that's very weird to think about. But not Indiana, the Final Four has not featured 4 1 seeds since that time, and it's also only the second time ever in the 64 team era that you've had all 4 1 seeds make the Final Four. It does kind of surprise me that has not happened more often. And for some reason, I thought it had. I knew about the time whenever I was, 11 years old. But will it go chalk from here? I guess if the favorites went out, it would be Auburn versus who would the championship, like if it's the other side, it's Houston versus Duke. Would it be Auburn versus Duke in the national championship? I believe that's how it would work out. So, and it really, whatever the championship matchup ends up being, it'll be epic. And I also saw this too. Apparently, this is in the Ken Pom era, which began in the late 90s. Apparently, 4 of the top 10 teams ever in Ken Pom, I hope I said that right, 4 of the top 10 teams ever in Ken Pom are featured in this year's Final Four. So that, according to that, means it's maybe one of the most loaded Final Fours of all time. Hopefully the games deliver. And I hope people stop throwing this narrative out there that March Madness is dead and that the NCAA tournament, nobody cares about it. It's nonsense, I feel like. But either way, I'm excited to see what happens. I don't really know who I'm pulling for. I like Auburn for Bruce Pearl. I think it's kind of cool to see Bruce Pearl kind of just, having his moment, right? I feel like he's kind of always been, the underdog head coach for a while and kind of had to build his way back up with Auburn. And so I kind of like what they're doing. Houston, of course, the Kelvin Sampson factor, that'll just be an interesting storyline to follow. I don't think I really want Duke to win just because it's Duke. I don't care who the head coach is. I don't care if it's not Mike Krzyzewski. I just don't. I feel like most people just don't want Duke to win. And then Florida with Todd Golden. And I know that's kind of has a little bit of controversy behind it, even though all the things that were alleged about him back at the end of 2024 ended up coming up. I guess, I don't know if it was proven false or why the investigation was closed in January of 2025 this year. But I don't know. He's one of the young guns in college basketball. So we'll end up seeing what ends up happening with him. And his Florida team is the team I had picked to win the national championship. I guess, I just realized this. We're going to have a first-time national championship head coach, whether it be Bruce Pearl, Kelvin Sampson, John Shire, or the aforementioned Todd Golden. So yeah, we're going to. I talked about this with Dustin. There is a new guard of coaches that are coming through, and one of them is eventually going to get there first, and likely multiple if they're able to continue down the path of success that they're currently on. So I just hope it's not John Shire. So anybody but Duke, I guess, is kind of where I'm at right now with the national championship in the Final Four. So I guess that's all of the main things I wanted to hit on before we transition over to Kyler Staley, and then I've got a few smaller things that we'll touch on the other side, and then we'll wrap this thing up. So without further ado, let's chat with our friend Kyler Staley more on the Indiana basketball transfer portal and some other things. Joining me on In Touch with Indiana Sports, it is none other than Kyler Staley, basketball recruiting analyst. You were guest number 1 on episode number 1. Now you're guest on episode 101. So how do you feel about that, Mr. Staley?
I don't know. Do I feel old? I guess you could say. I don't know. I'm at least 100 episodes old. 100 episodes of In Touch with Indiana Sports old. But I've been on here obviously a few times. But no, it's pretty crazy. I want to say congrats first of all. 100 episodes is pretty awesome. So it's been a really good show. Obviously, it's been really good for Hoosier Illustrated and everything, and it's only going to grow from here. So congratulations, my man. Really awesome.
I appreciate it. I appreciate you and Alec for both bringing me in. I mean, I was going to say a year ago, but it's not even been a year. It's, been 100 episodes ago. I guess we'll just say it like that. So definitely appreciate it. And hopefully we can keep building this in some way, shape, or form moving forward. But also real quick, before we get into all the basketball stuff that we're going to talk about here, at the time of this recording, which is, of course, on a Sunday, I know we will release this on Monday. But how are you dealing with the storms right now? I know a lot of Indiana is getting the brunt of some severe weather right now.
I'm doing okay. I mean, it is thunderstorming here up in Fishers, Indiana. Not as bad as what it is in southern Indiana. I know my family lives in Bedford, just about 20 minutes south of Bloomington. So I know they're getting it pretty bad. I know they're in tornado warnings, but yeah, it's springtime, man. That's what always happens, right? And you got a mixture of good Midwest weather, you could say. It's 70 degrees out, windy as all can be, and just thunderstorming. It's relaxing. It's a little stressful all at the same time, but I mean, it is what it is. You're just used to it, right?
Speaking of, I don't know if this is completely true, relaxing and stressful. It's probably more so on the stressful side. The Indiana transfer portal is kind of empty, at least when it comes to the guys who are leaving the program. We found out late last week that Bryson Tucker, the final name to put their name into the transfer portal, assuming Luke Goody is going to come back and get that extra year of eligibility, of course. But when it comes to scholarship players, no one else at this current moment in time expected to return to the first year of the Darren DeVries era. And I think you've seen a lot of mixed reaction to it. Of course, you have people who are worried like, okay, Indiana's going to have to rebuild an entire roster. But there's also the positive aspect where, like, okay, Darren DeVries is going to have free reign and be able to build this team exactly the way that he would want to.
Yeah, it's weird. I guess you could say it's a little unsettling in a little bit of a way, but I talked to a Kentucky fan over the weekend and stuff, and he actually covers Kentucky for KSR as well. Talking to him over the weekend, and he was in that same position last year, right? And Kentucky didn't have a team. I'm pretty sure Louisville didn't have a team at all. Maybe they had a few guys that maybe rolled over.
Neither one of them
Yeah.
did.
So they went through this exact same thing, right? And I don't want to say this is the new norm of college basketball, because not every year you're going to have a brand new team, right? You're not going to always have to replace every single member of your roster and stuff. But in this day and age of college basketball with the transfer portal and kind of the flexibility that a lot of these players have, it's going to happen from time to time. And I'm not stressed out at all. Obviously, with the Indiana team, it is a little weird to think, if the season started today, Indiana would not be able to play a single college basketball game, because the only guy that they have confirmed on their team
they'd be having open tryouts is what they'd be doing.
Yes, they'd be having Bloomington open tryouts, going to all the frats and trying to see what ballers they can get out of that. But the only guy that's on the roster right now for next season is Trent Sisley. obviously an incoming freshman and whatnot. So it is a little weird right now, but I wouldn't panic if I was Indiana fans at all. It took Kentucky 2 months last year, if I can remember correctly, to build a team. And obviously in this 30 days, it's just, for you to enter the portal, not necessarily you have to commit to a team right away or whatever and stuff. They got a little longer that they can do that. And it's going to play out. You're going to get, your heavy hitters. You're going to get the big guys that you want to get early on within the next couple of weeks. But there's going to be a few guys that, DeVries will look at and you'll say, hey, he can fit on this roster. We can add him in certain spots or whatever and stuff. Kind of how Indiana was last year. I felt like it was pretty balanced with the way that they were adding players. And then obviously you get down to the Langdon Hattons and stuff like that, the Dallas Jameses and those guys just filling out roster spots. But I think Indiana right now is in an okay position. It was expected that pretty much every player on the Indiana team from this past season, the ones that aren't graduating, to enter the portal. And that's not to say, a player can't come back. I don't really see any player from Indiana's team coming back next season, just based off what's
even Luke
going
Goody,
on.
Or do you think Luke Goody is
Luke Goody? Yes, I'm sorry,
around?
Luke Goody.
Okay.
Talking about the players that are just in the transfer portal.
Gotcha.
In general, but I don't see any of those players coming back, considering the fact, by this time, DeVries has definitely had a one-on-one conversation with all of them. If any of them were considering staying, they probably wouldn't have entered the portal. But it is what it is. DeVries is going to get his guys. It's all going to work out at the end. So Hoosier Nation doesn't need to panic or anything right now. You just need to see how this thing plays out.
Of course, there's been a few names, a few rumblings, and the obvious one is that Tucker DeVries' son will transfer from West Virginia to Indiana. That, of course, is not official at the time of this recording. There's also been Connor Enright. He'll be on an official visit this coming Tuesday, if I'm not mistaken, from DePaul, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was reported. I want to give Jeff Rabjohns from Peegs the credit here. I think he's the one that reported it first, but it's reported that Josh Dix from Iowa is going to be on campus on Monday. And a big one that most Indiana fans probably know, Ryan Conwell, the guy, shooting guard that played for Indiana State 2 years ago on that really good Indiana State team that should have made the NCAA tournament. Go Trees! Already gonna put that out there, but as I'm pointing at my
peep
Indiana
the clock,
State
right?
side,
Peep the Indiana State clock in the background,
right there. So just shout out to my Sycamores there. But anyway, Ryan Conwell was a hot name last year. Had a really stellar year with Indiana State. Ended up transferring to Xavier, but with Sean Miller going to Texas, he entered his name in the portal once again. He's an in-state kid. He's from Indianapolis, played at Pike High School. Was the Marion County Player of the Year in 2022. Went to South Florida. Had one season there. Came back to the Midwest. So that's a guy. This is a straight bucket getter of a guy that Indiana has not had in a long, long time that you can just get the ball and go get a bucket. So that would be really, really interesting if they can land him. That would be great. Then obviously Josh Dix, who had a really, really good season with Iowa, entered the portal with McCaffrey being let go. One of I would say probably a top 5 transfer portal guy. I don't know exactly, what Indiana in terms of if they can land him or not. But the good thing is they got him on campus. So that's obviously a great sign that he has interest in Indiana. But, you mentioned Connor Enright, a guy that played with DeVries at Drake for 2 years, went to DePaul, had a pretty okay season or whatnot, a pretty serviceable player. But I will say there is one guy that has kind of popped up recently, and that is Flory Badunga.
Yes,
from
that's
Kansas.
what I was going to get to next.
Sorry to kind of cut.
No, you're good. You just roll right through them.
Yeah. So anyway, Flory Badunga, obviously, 2024 Mr. Indiana from Kokomo High School, went to Kansas, and pretty surprisingly is transferring out of Kansas, which kind of comes out of a surprise because with Hunter Dickinson, he's finally out of college eligibility. He was slated to go in there and take that spot, and he would be the main post player for Kansas next year. But who knows what happens, obviously, behind the scenes or whatever and stuff. And there obviously is a strong possibility, and Flory's Guardians have made that pretty clear that Kansas is still a strong possibility that they will return. But what I'm getting at is you've got Indiana that will be in the mix. And then you've got Auburn, and Auburn was a team that really recruited. Bruce Pearl did a really, really good job in recruiting Flory. Was very, very consistent when Flory came into America, came into Indiana. Was a guy that, along with Kansas, those two staffs were really, really recruiting Flory. So back to that, you could see Indiana being in the mix there. I know there's a little bit of talk with the Adams, family and stuff, Indiana Elite. That's where Flory kind of played at. It does look like that Drew Adams is going to be an assistant coach on DeVries' roster, so or DeVries' staff. So Flory would be definitely an interesting name, but those are some heavy hitter guys, right? And I think Indiana is in a really, really good spot to land a certain amount of those guys. We'll just see kind of how that plays out, and you see how the rest of the transfer portal kind of shapes up.
Do you think any of the guys that we just mentioned are, someone you build a team around? I think if there's anybody that would, maybe Flory Badunga, maybe Tucker DeVries, is there any one particular player that can kind of be, not like, I don't want to say your base, but like just someone that Indiana can rely on as a consistent player for next year?
I think the guys that I mentioned are Ryan Conwell, like he's probably the most consistent guy out of all of them, man. A guy, like I mentioned, a straight bucket getter, a guy that scores extremely well. He scored over 45% from the field last year, 41% three-point shooter, a guy that, like I said, you can just give the ball to him and he can go score. He's very consistent in that regards. Flory, is still a guy that's got a lot of potential. And you saw a lot of that at Kansas this year. His stats don't really jump out. I think he only averaged 5 points a game, but everyone in the state of Indiana knows how good Flory is. National level, they know how good Flory is going to be. He's an NBA prospect in a lot of ways. So I don't know if you necessarily build around one of those players. I think when you've seen DeVries, at Drake, at West Virginia, it's a really mixed bag, I would say, or I should say like a balanced bag of guys that just kind of step up in certain amounts of ways. Tucker DeVries is a guy that obviously is probably going to be the go-to guy in a lot of ways. Will have the ball in his hands a lot of the time. Same if they land Ryan Conwell, will have the ball in his hands a lot of the time. But I don't think that there's necessarily one guy that you build around with this Indiana team. I do think that it'll be a really balanced system, if I had to guess.
What do you make of guys who will be, not necessarily in the class of 2025, or I guess it could be class of 2025, but is there anybody who now that there's a new coaching staff in place for Indiana that could be some last minute, freshmen? I guess that would be class of 2025, but do you foresee anybody committing to Indiana at this point in time?
Obviously it is springtime, right? And Mike Woodson made a really good job of every spring. It felt like landing a guy late.
Last year was Bryson Tucker.
Bryson Tucker, Mackenzie Mbako, Malik Renew, Tamar Bates, like those guys. Like if you really look back, obviously there's opportunity, or there's going to be maybe a chance or two, but I don't know if that's necessarily DeVries' style. It just seems like Mike Woodson kind of these guys kind of fell in his lap in a certain amount of ways, and guys are just looking for an NBA connection in a lot of the ways, and a place that they can go learn and develop. And Mike Woodson would obviously develop them, but I don't know necessarily. I know that there was the 3 West Virginia incoming freshmen that all decommitted. So, and I can't think of their names right off the top of my head, but obviously those guys are possibilities to come with this, come to Indiana. That they committed under DeVries at West Virginia. So obviously that's pretty strong. You've got Trent Sisley already committed and stuff. So, and Haran Zerno, probably not going to end up keeping him. He's already decommitted from Indiana. He technically did say he would still consider Indiana, but that's probably not going to happen anymore. So you can kind of wave bye to him a little bit. So it'll be curious to see if what Indiana can do. When it comes to a freshman class, DeVries is a guy that likes to get a mixed bag of transfer portal guys and freshmen that he can develop and whatnot. And having Trent Sisley as the start as the base is already really, really good. So it'll be curious to see if any of these guys decommit from a certain school, or if he can land those West Virginia guys that already decommitted from West Virginia.
Speaking of, high school basketball, you were at the Indiana State Finals this past weekend. What did you kind of see there? And I know Coach Darren DeVries was in attendance as well.
Yeah, I gotta say this was probably, I've been going to the state finals for the past 5-6 years or so. I have to say this has to be one of the top state finals Saturdays that they've ever had in Indiana. All 4 games, class 1A, 2A, 3A, and 4A, all 4 of them were down to the wire. It was a really, really fun atmosphere with that. So obviously Darren DeVries makes his first public appearance, really, when it comes to the state of basketball and stuff, which obviously that was kind of a given in a lot of ways. If you're the head coach,
feels like it's a rite of passage when you're the new Indiana coach to get spotted at a high school game.
Yeah, you obviously have to do that, and there's no bigger stage than going to the Pacers Arena. And the Class 4A game between Jeffersonville and the undefeated Fishers. Tigers. It's a massive game. And obviously only in the state of Indiana, and I tweeted this out, a video, only in the state of Indiana do you have an NBA arena that's filled at all three levels of the arena. That just shows you what it just means there. But Coach DeVries was out and about. He wasn't really watching a certain player that was reported or anything like that. He was there to watch basketball in a lot of ways and meet a lot of people. It was a good networking event, you could say, for him, meeting with IHSAA representatives and things like that. So, and he got to take into really, really good games with the Class 3A and the Class 4A state championship. And obviously shout out to former Indiana player Sharon Wilkerson, who coached Jeffersonville and led them to beating the undefeated Tigers. So that was a really, really special moment. And it was just cool to see that Darren DeVries was there. There was a lot of knock, online about, how Michael Woodson wouldn't go out to these certain events and stuff like that. I've been to all the state finals since Michael Woodson's been the head coach. He was always there. So I just want to kind of put that out the passage right now. But Darren DeVries obviously making his rounds and stuff. I totally expect to see him out in a lot of these in-state games, especially when the high school season starts back up next year. Obviously, AAU is getting ready to, come around. There's going to be that live period time where all the coaches are going to be out. And, by that time, he'll have a staff, and we'll kind of see who they're going to be recruiting, when it comes to the state and out of the state.
Back to the real quick to the Mike Woodson thing. I don't get why people have to just throw those things out there. If you know he's there, don't say he's not there. And if you don't know whether or not he's there, don't say it either way, because that's just complete nonsense. You're somebody who covers prep hoops and high school basketball at a very efficient level, I'll say. And so you would know better than most people whether or not he's there. So real honestly, not that it appeals to me personally, but good of you to kind of get that out there, I feel like, right?
Yeah. I feel like, there's a lot of accurate things you can say about Mike Woodson in a lot of ways during his tenure and stuff. But, and there was that, that sectional week, what was it, last year, when the people were complaining that he wasn't out and about and stuff like that. I get that. But when it came to the state, Mike Woodson was always there. He usually had all three of his assistant coaches there as well. So, if you're the head coach of Indiana, if you're the head coach of Purdue, Notre Dame, Butler, it doesn't matter. You're at the state finals. That is the spot where every coach, and even, Chris Collins from Northwestern and his staff were there to watch Trey Singleton, who plays for Jeffersonville. They ran 4 deep there to watch that. So it wasn't just the state of Indiana coaches that were there. It was coaches from Miami, Ohio, IU, Indy. It was just a lot of coaches out there that were there to watch, because the state finals in Indiana, when it comes to basketball, that's the Mecca, right? So, you're going to see a lot of talented guys and a lot of really, really good basketball in those 4 games.
And speaking of good basketball, I feel like I've been saying speaking of as we've transitioned segments or, portions of this segment a lot today. But you've been checking out the Final Four or the Elite Eight to the Final Four, I'm sure. Been a very, really last night's game between Florida and Texas Tech. One of the most intense comebacks I think we've seen so far this NCAA tournament. And we had a hell of a good time watching it for sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think overall the NCAA tournament's been pretty good this year. Obviously, there hasn't been, as many upsets. There hasn't been a Cinderella team or anything like that.
Yeah, it's not a true Cinderella at all this year.
Yeah, it is whatever. And it looks like, from what I'm watching the Auburn Michigan State game, it looks like we're going to have all 4 number 1 seeds in it. So,
but that hasn't happened in a while. As much as chalky as that is, when's the last time you've had all 4 number 1s make the Final Four?
It's been, I think they said 2008, and this would be the only second time I think that's ever really happened. So, obviously you want that Cinderella team in there. You want the Drakes. You want those types of teams in there and stuff. But at the same time, you're getting the 4 best teams that you could possibly get in that Final Four. So it's going to make for a really, really good next Saturday and stuff. And I think it really is a toss-up when it comes to who's going to be cutting down the nets and who's going to be winning the national championship, and that's what makes it so much fun. It's sad that college basketball is about to end or whatever and stuff. It's going to be a long few months before it starts back up, but we're going to really end up on a high note. I really think so.
Another thing, too, you mentioned kind of the offseason. It reminded me of this. I heard that Indiana this offseason is eligible for one of those, foreign trips like that Mike Woodson got to take back before his first season. Do you think Darren DeVries, I'm sure he'll take advantage of that. Any idea of what that may look like this year? Will it be the Bahamas again? Could it be something totally different? What is the process for usually planning something like that? And if you don't know the answer to, that's totally fine. But I did want to go and ask you that.
Yeah, I do think that I even think there was a report, and I'm sorry, I don't know who exactly reported this stuff. I do
I think
think
it
that
was Mike
DeVries.
Nizelek, but I'm not 100%,
Yes,
but I'm pretty sure it's Mike
okay.
Nizelek who did that.
But I think he said that DeVries was open to doing that or whatever and stuff. And look, Michael Woodson did it 4 years ago when he first took over Indiana, right? It was a brand new team. Obviously, you had guys that came back from the season prior and stuff, but he had some new players in that. I think overall, it's just a good bonding experience for this team. It's a chance to get the team out early in games that obviously don't really matter in the grand scheme of things, but can get them out there playing and seeing what you have in a roster and what you can kind of build on with that. I think it would be kind of foolish not to do this type of trip, going to whether it is the Bahamas or Spain or something like that. And playing in these types of games, playing in 3 games against a professional basketball team against really, really good players who play at the professional level. I think it'd be a really, really good bonding experience for this team. It's going to be a brand new team. You're going to be trying to put a lot together and stuff. Why not take advantage of that? If you've got the money, which Indiana probably definitely does, to do this, and you're eligible for it, I don't see any reason not to do that. I think it only benefits Indiana in the long run, honestly.
Kyler, I appreciate your time as always, and we'll do this again in the probably not like very near future, but with the frequency of shows toning down, we'll have to spread guests out, and I know that's a good thing to do, but we'll definitely have you in throughout the off season, especially as Indiana starts landing some of these guys in the transfer portal or upcoming freshmen as well, that sort of thing.
Yeah, we got a busy next few weeks. There's obviously this week. Can't announce it right now, but something big is about to happen. So that's going to be pretty exciting.
Juicy
And then,
information.
yeah, something big is about to happen. So when it comes to you, me, Alec, and everybody,
Keep your eyes peeled if you're a fan of anything that we do on this site. We'll just say that.
Absolutely. So the next time I talk to you, obviously those changes will be occurring or have occurred. So, but obviously with Indiana, the transfer portal stuff coming out, there's going to be a lot of breaking news coming out the next few weeks and stuff. So obviously follow all of us. We're going to have all the information and stuff. You keep watching John's show. Keep checking out our podcast, our written content and stuff. So there's going to be a lot of updates, but it's exciting, man. Obviously it sucks that college basketball is kind of ending here soon, but the transfer portal stuff, recruiting stuff, having a new coach, it keeps everything exciting at the very least.
And this is more, at least for me, when it comes to you and me, kind of maybe more my cup of tea, but I'm ready to watch the spring game for Indiana football here in a few weeks.
Yeah, that's going to be fun too. Obviously, all this talk of, Indiana having a brand new coach and basketball side of things, you kind of forget about the spring game, but I'm excited to watch that too. It's just going to suck because you get that little taste of it and stuff. And then
you got to wait until August. Yeah. But yeah.
Yeah. So
appreciate it again. As always, Kyler, we'll do this again here sometime.
Yes, sir.
Right. Big shout out to Kyler Staley as always for his time, and you heard him kind of mentioning that some new things were coming, and I'll say this: I didn't know he was going to mention that. I'm fully aware of the new things that are coming as well. I had been previously told not to mention that, even in like mentioning that things were coming, but I guess that since it's very I'm not even going to give a timeline, but just keep your eyes peeled, as I said during that segment. Because something new is on the horizon when it comes to the Hoosier Illustrated crew. That's pretty much the extent of what I'll mention, and I'm included in that as well. And also just a quick little caveat: the changes with that I can't really be specific about right now. Doesn't have anything to do with why my show is going weekly. That is solely my decision. Just to kind of mention that one last time, and then I'll kind of just move away from talking about that anymore. So again, this moving to once weekly thing is totally my call. I needed to do that for my own sanity in the very near future. So with that being said, again, thanks to Kyler Staley for all of the good stuff he always provides for us. We'll definitely be checking in with him over the course, as these different transfer portal guys commit down the line. Whenever that ends up being, who knows how long this process will ends up being for Indiana. But I'm sure by the end of April, at the latest, we'll know what this roster looks like. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm totally off base with that. Maybe it'll take a lot longer. Maybe it'll be a lot shorter. Who knows? But I tend to think that this will be a bit of a process for Darren DeVries as he kind of feels out what he wants to do with his first team in Indiana. And then like we were talking about too with the off-season foreign trip, I'm still looking forward to seeing what that ends up being if they end up actually doing that. I think it can only be beneficial. So we'll end up seeing how that works itself out too. I feel like I'm holding in a belch. If it seems like I'm a little uncomfortable and moving around a lot, then that is that's what's going on right now. So I do want to go ahead and get into one of the comments that we have right here on the YouTube feed, just because it does still have to do the transfer portal, and then we'll continue forward. But friend Justin Beard, he says, since the roster is completely cleared, fans will be eagerly waiting the first coach or player who comes and or commits. Advice: don't get wrapped up in the stats, folks. This is a coach that focuses on chemistry and togetherness in a squad. Yes, I think that's very important to remember. And also, Alec mentioned something the other day that I had also talked about previously or thought was an important thing to keep in mind. The process-oriented style of DeVries and how that kind of mirrors what Curt Cignetti was like. And I don't know, not every process is created equal. We know that. But I think it's important to note that when a coach, no matter what sport you're talking about, has his way, and I don't want to say set in his ways because that kind of sounds like they could be stubborn and that they don't adjust accordingly. But when they have a set way that they, like to go about preparing, I think it just goes to show that when you find the right guys to buy into that, I think it can only, kind of enhance the level of success that you're trying to achieve. And that's how we saw everything come together nice and perfectly in a bow with Curt Cignetti and his first staff, or in his first roster, I should say. We can say staff and roster, honestly. All of the pieces meshed just right, we can say. And who knows? I know I'm kind of veering over to football because I've kind of made this comparison previously and very recently, but who knows if the pieces that are put together next fall will mesh in that exact way. And we won't know if the same thing happens to Darren DeVries in his first year either. It's going to be kind of an experiment, right? And just like Cignetti was an experiment. Like, we know what he's done, what DeVries has done during his 1 year in West Virginia and his previous seasons at Drake, but he's been around the college game long enough, even though he hasn't been a head coach for nearly as long. He's been around the game long enough to where he's learned from the best with Dana Altman, and Greg McDermott, and many others, I'm sure. But when you've been around those two guys who have had fairly high levels of success at the Division I level at Creighton and at Oregon, now they haven't won national championships, but those are guys who have built consistent winning programs. I think that's really all you can ask for at this day and age when you're trying to get somebody acclimated to your program. And also with DeVries being, I was going to say as young as he is, he's not the youngest guy ever, but Darren DeVries is somebody who, if he finds the level of success that he is searching for, that Indiana fans are hoping for, he's liable to be with the program for at least 20 years, I would imagine. Maybe longer. Who knows? A lot of that, when someone gets to that age that I'm kind of referring to, getting to 70 years old, a lot of that just kind of comes down to, whether you're able to stay healthy at that age or not. I mean, look at Rick Pitino. He's in his mid-70s, if I'm not mistaken. And he had one of the best teams in college basketball this year. They just had one of the early exits, one of the more shocking results, I guess you could say, from the NCAA tournament. And what's interesting, you saw a lot of people complaining about the lack of upsets. And I guess when you look at, even though a 10 seed defeated number 2 St. John's, I think because it was Arkansas and because it was John Calipari, it seemed like it was like less of a surprise, right? If that 10 seed was, someone like a Drake or, someone who wasn't from one of the top conferences, maybe it would have been a lot bigger of a deal. So who knows? Either way, I just want to throw that out there. Excuse me. I feel like I've had a lot of pauses today. But let's go on. I want to go ahead and transition away from football or from basketball and talk a little bit about some football things and then get into a few other small things before we wrap up today's show. But along the lines of football, as we've talked about, we are getting into, we're less than a few weeks away from the spring game. And I'm very excited about that. Very excited to take that in here very soon. And one thing that I think will get Indiana football fans excited is the fact that Fernando Mendoza he's aiming. If you haven't seen the article on Hoosier Illustrated, Fernando Mendoza says he is eyeing a mastery level of the Indiana football offense. And I know words are words, and that doesn't really mean anything until you see anything. But you got to think about it like this. Fernando Mendoza is somebody who already had a sibling on this Indiana football roster. And so one thing he's been able to have access to that maybe other transfer portal quarterbacks wouldn't have been able to get their hands on is the offensive playbook, and kind of getting some tips and tricks from his younger brother, Alberto Mendoza. And I got to say this too, just while I'm thinking about it. It's very interesting. Fernando Mendoza stepping into this role as the, inevitable starter, if you will, when his younger brother is kind of just sitting there. And I know he's the younger brother, and so it shouldn't necessarily matter, but it's got to be weird for him in some way, shape, or form to kind of see him come in and really unofficially be given the keys, right? While he's going to be sitting as either the backup or even the third string quarterback. That's also going to be an interesting battle to watch, and interesting to see who takes snaps for these, the other offense whenever we get to the spring game. Will it be Mendoza? Will it be Cherry? Will it be somebody else? Will it be the transfer from Old Dominion? I believe it's Old Dominion. I don't have his name right in front of me, but it will be, since we have no Taven Jackson, it'll be interesting to see who steps into that role as backup. And it will be a very cool thing to see if it's Mendoza to Mendoza with Fernando and Alberto being 1 and 2. I don't know if that'll be how things end up, but if I remember correctly, Alberto Mendoza was ahead of Tyler Cherry in the depth chart last year. So I don't know if that'll be how things work out this year. Actually, I do think, I could be wrong about this, but I do remember one of Indiana's backup quarterbacks, I think, was being elevated to, not, I'd say elevated, kind of moved to like player coach, sort of a weird role like that due to some injury. I can't remember if that was Tyler Cherry or if that's somebody else. Again, maybe I'm misspeaking on that, but that'll be interesting to see if that ends up being Tyler Cherry. I would assume that would mean now Alberto Mendoza is QB2 in that sense. But either way, I do think Fernando Mendoza is going to have a leg up, compared to other quarterbacks that would have been stepping into this role. And so, should Indiana expect a well-oiled machine from their offense come the first game of 2025? I think in past years, I would say no, but I don't think there's any reason not to expect this Indiana team to already look extremely talented in the first few games. Now, will there be some blips? Absolutely. They're not going to look perfect all the time, but they also don't have to look perfect, especially in those first 3 games when you're playing the Old Dominions, the Kennesaw States. I think their FCS opponent is once again Indiana State, if I'm not mistaken. But so there's no reason that Indiana shouldn't start 3-0. And we're really not going to find out, how high the ceiling can be until at least week 4. I think it's week 4, and they take on Illinois at home. And that's just because many people are expecting not only Indiana to still be on the, in the upper tier of the Big Ten, but Illinois was kind of a step below that college football playoff level for teams in the Big Ten last year. But they're also expected to kind of still be in that conversation. So that Indiana-Illinois game in week 4 will likely end up kind of being a separation, if you will. If those two teams are still on a similar path, right? One of those two will have the upper hand if they can get that early conference victory. If both of those teams have aspirations to maybe get one of those spots in the college football playoff again next year. So that's going to be probably one of the biggest games maybe of the season for Indiana. I'm not saying that if they lose it, that their chances at that ultimate goal of getting back to the playoff are over, but it's definitely a game that could separate that could separate an exceptional season to more of a good or great season, right? It's gonna be one of those, that alongside Oregon on the road, Iowa on the road, and even the Penn State game. I can't remember if Penn State's on the road or at home. I think it might be on the road. Either way, we'll dive into more of that some other time. But I am excited for Fernando Mendoza. I know it's a lot to live up to what Curtis Rourke was able to do, especially when you think about the fact that he played through a torn ACL and nobody knew that until after the season was over. But if Fernando Mendoza, like the level of confidence he appears to be showing right now, I don't think he's nervous at all about the keys that have been handed to him. I wouldn't imagine. So I'm looking forward to seeing how he looks in the spring game here in a few weeks. If he looks like somebody who is ready to take over, because if you remember last year, Curtis Rourke didn't necessarily look like he was ready to be given the starting job. A lot of people thought Taven Jackson looked like the better quarterback in the spring game. And, that's totally fine. But I think a lot of people are expecting Fernando Mendoza to kind of just walk in and I don't want to act like that the QBs behind him are that much worse. But when you're somebody who has the, the success that he had at California, I think you're kind of expecting that to translate as closely as possible, if not better, to this system that has proven to be very, I guess, efficient with Indiana, right? I mean, everything that was important to this team is returning minus Tino Sinceri, as we've talked about multiple times. So, actually, and that's also, well, never mind. This is along those same lines. Chandler Whitmer, the new quarterbacks coach, is somebody that Fernando Mendoza has said, even though he's brand new to the Indiana staff, that he's the best quarterbacks coach that he's ever worked with. And so it'll be interesting to see if that ends up being something that, holds true, or if it's, just, smoke and mirrors, as they say sometimes. Yeah, I'm also getting excited to talk, more and more footballs. We're getting the off season, especially, now that we're doing these shows once weekly. I'm going to try to spread things out between basketball and football more evenly and throwing other things in there from now and again. And also have an idea of a new type of segment I want to start doing. I'm not going to mention what that is just yet, because I had the idea pop into my head earlier this evening before I started recording, and I need to workshop a few things on what that might look like. And if we do end up doing that, we'll I'll mention what that is down the road. So just want to go ahead and throw that out there, though, in case it does end up being something that comes to fruition soon. Before we wrap up, a couple of small things. I do want to mention this real quick. Shout out to former Indiana basketball walk-on Corey Barnett, who was named the head coach at Oral Roberts. And, of course, we all lovingly remember Oral Roberts as the team that knocked off Kentucky in the NIT. What was that, 13, 12 years ago, something like that? So that's always fun to think about. And, of course, Corey Barnett was, if I'm not mistaken, I think Kyler Staley mentioned this a few weeks ago. I think he was previously on Darren DeVries' staff at West Virginia. Many thought he may have followed him to Indiana, considering the ties that he had. But I'll be excited to see what happens with Barnett at his first head coaching gig, if he's able to get his team to the NCAA tournament and if he's able to rise up the coaching ranks. So definitely pulling for him in that regard. And then we'll wrap up as we typically do. We'll check in on Indiana baseball and softball. Unfortunately, the baseball team lost 2 of 3 this weekend to USC. They took the second of the first 2 games that were a doubleheader. They lost the first one 5-10 and then bounced back with a 13-6 win, and then lost a heartbreaker 13-12 in the finale on Saturday. And I'll say this, I just hate that Indiana baseball, it seems like a lot of the momentum they had dating back to the end of the Tracy Smith era and to the beginning of Jeff Mercer, it's starting to wean off a little bit. They're not really the powerhouse that they once were. And I hope they're able to get back to those ways sometime soon. It may not be this year, unfortunately. And then on the softball side of things, Ohio State, or Indiana was facing Ohio State. They've lost the first 2. They'll have their third game. I guess it got postponed to 7:00 tonight, meaning Monday. But they lost their first 2 games, 1-7 and then 4-12. And it looks like that one finished in 5 innings. I don't know what the reason for that was, or if their run rules are any different than the baseball team. But either way, unfortunate weekends for Indiana baseball and softball. Sorry about that very strange transition into these final couple of minutes. But if you couldn't tell, I don't know if it'll show up in the post-production or not. My wife had to pop in and tell me that the tornado sirens were going off. So I had to stop the recording a little abruptly. We went down to our neighbor's house, who thankfully lives right down the street. We hung out in their basement for a little bit, and thankfully everything is okay in our neck of the woods. But I do believe I was getting close to ending the show, and I know I was talking Indiana baseball and softball, and just kind of talking about how things have been a little bit disappointing, especially on the baseball side. But looking ahead to this upcoming week for the baseball team, they've got Louisville on Tuesday on the Big Ten Network, and then a 3-game series against Michigan State. All 4 of those games will be at home. And then for softball, they will continue their season with, now they won't have a midweek contest, but they will continue against Maryland this upcoming weekend. They'll also be at home at Andy Moore Field, and they'll take on Louisville the following week on a Wednesday. And so a lot of Louisville action going on with Hoosiers in baseball and softball, and a lot of home games too. So if you're around the area and want to catch some springtime baseball or softball, now is as good of time as any to take that in. So with that being said, now I can officially wrap up today's show. So if you stuck around for the entire thing, I appreciate it as always, and we'll do it all again next week. And until then, this has been another edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com.